So before we present this video, I have a few things I'd like to share. This video was initially written and recorded in October of 2021. And during that initial writing and recording, I read a part of a Wikipedia article where I introduced John Madden, and it goes, "It is named after Pro Football Hall of Fame coach and commentator John Madden," which I add, may he rest in peace. But then as I was recording that, and I read it out loud, and I was editing it, and I was like, wait a minute, did I Mandela affect myself? So I Googled him and found out that John Madden was alive and well. So I edit that part where I say, may he rest in peace, out. But then, as I complete the video, John Madden passes away. So I delayed the release of the video because I didn't want it to seem like a cash grab, although this channel doesn't make any money at the moment. And I didn't want it to seem like a clout chase where I use his name so people, who are searching John Madden at the time I was passing and my video pops up, and people look at it. I didn't want to do that. So I wanted to give respect to John and his family and let the video come out at a later date, which is now, because I'm running out of memory on my phone and I have other projects I want to work on. So John, I hope it's okay that I go ahead and release this video. So it's a very long video with my thoughts are kind of all over the place, but as I state in the video, it's like a diary. It's how I keep track of my thoughts at the time, and I can reflect on it later at some other point. Finally, I'd just like to add that in no way, shape, or form is this video a knock at John Madden. He was one of my favorite commentators when I did watch football, and I just wanted to make sure it's clear that even though I do offer criticism, it's about the game and not John Madden, the man himself. So, if you're ready, I hope you enjoy the video. Let's go ahead and roll it out. If you clicked on this thinking it would be a video about American football, legendary coach and broadcast announcer John Madden, or the box art cover curse, I'd like to extend my apologies, because this isn't a video about any of those. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Now, if Jedi mind tricks don't work on you, or if you're curious about what I have to say, then I'd like to invite you, my family, friends, gamers, and cat lovers to my video on what I call the Madden Effect in video games. I've mentioned about this before in previous videos and loosely covered it each time. In this video, I'm going to take a longer look at it and hopefully provide a clearer picture of what I think this is. The Madden Effect and why I think it's bad for video games. At least for me. Madden is an American football video game series developed by EA Tiburon for EA Sports. It is named after Pro Football Hall of Fame coach and commentator John Madden. Since 2005, EA Sports has held exclusive licensing rights, with the NFL making Madden the only American football game available with all the NFL teams and its players. Before 2005, we had a laundry list of NFL football games we could play that offered a variety of different ways we could experience American football video games on our TV screens, but with most opting for the bottom-up game presentation, where you work towards the end zone at the top of the screen. But once EA acquired exclusive licensing rights to the league and its players, suddenly we no longer had a variety of new football games to play. There were a couple of developers that tried their hand at developing a different American football video game experience. Backbreaker, released in 2010, comes to mind. And this game, I downloaded just to have footage showing developers are trying.
And I nearly did not get arrested, get thrown face first into a paddy wagon, get taken for a rough ride. And I nearly did not have prison sex and lockup last night. Nearly ain't a good thing.
And he's off to the races. Look at that little mutant run.
I don't think you can say that, Glenn. Holy mother of mutant mayhem, he scored! Hey, you killed Ref. It's not murder if they have it covered, right? Take the hand, do something about that Ref, you pussies!
But without access to the licenses of the NFL and its players, I don't think these games are quite hitting the mainstream. And because of this, EA has a stranglehold on the American football video game market for nearly 2 decades now. I no longer play American football games. Call me a salty Sega fan, but I was a 2K guy. I felt like Sega had the best version of the American football experience. But once EA picked up the licenses, that put an end to my favorite series at the time and forced me to only play Madden if I wanted to continue gaming on the virtual gridiron, which I tried. And I wasn't satisfied and haven't played an American football game since. So why is that? Well, let's take a deeper look at Madden. But before we do, I'd like to point out that my all-time favorite American football game is Super Tecmo Bowl for the Nintendo Entertainment System. And until I tried Madden in the 90s on the Sega Genesis, I had tried just about every football game there was. And Super Tecmo Bowl was just it for me. Even with the odd diagonal patterns you had to run to score touchdowns. But Madden was the first football game that hit a little bit different for me. It felt like more than just an arcade game. It presented itself like I was watching a real game, but with 16-bit graphics.
He'll remember that number.
Anyway, this put Madden on the map for me and many others. And sadly, the Tecmo series would slowly die off, with their last entry with the NFL license being on the PS1, and a throwback version without licenses released on Xbox and PS3. It was during this time, while Tecmo and many of the titles were in decline, Madden began to emerge as probably the #1 American football game in the country. Now that I've gotten that all laid out for us, I'm finally going to make my point. Madden had captured the hearts of many football fans and then sealed the deal by exclusively acquiring the licenses to the NFL and its players. We no longer had different games to select from, but what we did have was supposedly the best NFL simulator. Or did we? What I think we got was monotony and complacency. If you've ever played more than one Madden within a couple years of each other, I think we can all agree there usually aren't many outstanding differences that set the games apart. Now obviously, if the last Madden you played was in 1993 and you just picked up a 2021 copy of the game, you'll probably notice significant differences. But with that exception aside, in my opinion, Madden is the same game every year with just gameplay, quality of life, roster, and graphics upgrades. Now I know the rules of football don't change very often. So how could EA possibly reinvent their simulator each season without pissing off their loyal fan base, the Puritans, the traditionalists, right? Well, that's the thing. I don't think they have to reinvent it, but they do have the rights to the licenses. So why aren't they trying to get creative? Try something different, scratch different itches in the NFL community. Now, there was NFL Street, but the last time a game was released under that title was in 2006. There's just so much wasted opportunity by EA in my opinion. They instead choose to play it safe each season and release the same game year after year with improvements. That is the Madden Effect. It's something I don't think is particularly exclusive to just football games or sports games either. I think developers do this with all kinds of titles and genres. Action-adventure, role-playing games, first-person shooters, you name it. If it persists, it's what eventually turns me off to a series. And it just so happens I have a series that instantly comes to mind. It's also one of my favorites, Monster Hunter. I've played this series since its inception, and sure, we get variety and diversity through the different new monsters that they introduce each game. Or the new maps, weapons, movesets we get with those weapons. But for the most part, in my opinion, Monster Hunter has pretty much been the same game each time, with just graphic, quality of life, and gameplay changes. And again, I just want to say this is just my opinion. It doesn't mean I'm right, it's just how I feel, and it's my experience. I know I'm in the minority. Game communities at large don't like developers messing with the formula that works, right? They found the secret sauce. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I'm different, and not for the sake of wanting to be different. I just really enjoy when game developers try to push boundaries or experiment with their sequels. Some of my favorite examples of this are Legend of Zelda 2, the Metroid series, and Donkey Kong Country. The Metroid series stands out because it's gone through several changes, including 2D side-scrolling platformer, first-person shooter, and third-person platformer. I wish more developers were this daring with their titles, and I often wonder why EA doesn't try to make different versions of American football using the licenses they have. Maybe there is some contract with the league and its players on how they can use their licenses and logos, which I would hope is not the reason why they're not trying to make different versions of football, because no other company wants to try their hand at making football games because they don't have the licenses. When I was a kid, there were so many more unique sports games we could play, like Baseball Simulator 1000, or I don't know if it's just Baseball Simulator 1, but whatever, Cyber Stadium Series Base Wars, and Mega Man Soccer, to list a few. One thing these games all had in common is your players were endowed with certain abilities, and in Base Wars, robots fought for bases. Even though I know they made one in the past, how cool would it be to have a futuristic football game with our favorite NFL teams? Or what if they merged with one of their other properties? Like, what if there was Apex Legends Football? I mean, what else could we come up with? Honestly, I understand companies have to make a profit, so being like game companies were in the past may not seem like a good move financially. And calling it the Madden Effect isn't really fair either, because lots of other game developers do this with their titles. Madden just sticks out to me. It's the first thing that pops in my head. Honestly, sometimes I just wonder if it's a localization issue. For that, the Final Fantasy series always comes to mind. The entire series is available now, but when they were releasing back in the 90s, Final Fantasy II was actually 4 in Japan, and 6 was 3 here in America. We didn't get the Japanese releases of 2, 3, and 5 until much later. And it's kind of obvious to tell why. When you look at the sequels for 2 and 3, they kind of look exactly the same as number 1. It was number 4 that kind of really set itself apart. So when 2, the Japanese 4, released here in America, it seemed like such a dramatic improvement from 1. And when the Japanese 6, or the American 3, released, well, some regard it as one of the best Final Fantasies ever made. Of course, they can't release a new football game every 6 years or so, and people will get pretty impatient. They have to keep pumping those babies out year after year. So again, not exactly the same thing, but in closing, the Madden Effect is just something I made up. It's not a fact, it's just how I feel about games and their sequels. It's what I call it. If developers make sequels that are pretty much the same as their predecessors, with just quality of life, gameplay, and graphics upgrades, I'm going to say the series suffers from the Madden Effect. And that's it. If you've made it to the end of the video, this is the part of the video where I like to ask the audience a question. And the question for this video will be, if you could take one of your favorite game titles and make a sequel completely different from its predecessors, what title would you pick and how would you change the sequel? Please post that in the comment section. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to see what kind of games or what kind of different game ideas we could come up with. As always, thanks for watching, and thanks for subscribing. Hold up. Before we roll credits, I wanted to touch up on that localization bit really quick. But I gotta explain something first. The way I get ideas for a lot of these videos is while I'm hanging out gaming with my friends, we chit-chat about a bunch of things game-related. And then I go, I should make a video about that. So the way I approach making these videos is as if it's a video diary on my thoughts about video games, to have a record of how I felt at the time, sprinkling a little bit of research to add a slight documentary feel to it. So there's more of a gut feeling that goes into the production, and sometimes I discover a lot more about myself or the topic I am covering as I write my thoughts down on paper. So after editing this whole thing and proof viewing it multiple times, I don't think I clearly conveyed what I was trying to say. While jotting down my thoughts for this essay, I came to the realization that it wasn't just a Madden thing, that many game series do this, just offer improvements and upgrades, then tinker with the framework. So when I said, honestly, sometimes I just wonder if it's a localization issue, it wasn't really an issue at all. It was me thinking to myself and not explaining that thought process well at all. So let me try that now. If it isn't fair to call it the Madden Effect, then why didn't I name it after another game series or company? That's when I wondered to myself, is it because of localization? Since we didn't get Western releases of many games during the 8-bit and 16-bit era, I couldn't see the slow progression of titles. And that's when the Final Fantasy series came to mind. For me, I went from playing Final Fantasy on the NES to Final Fantasy 2 or 4 on the Super Nintendo, and the improvements were astounding for a very young me. And since I never saw 2, 3, or 5 until much later in life, maybe that's why I didn't call this the Final Fantasy effect. And as far as them not localizing Final Fantasy sequels because graphically the games were nearly the same as their predecessors, I was wrong. I had once read somewhere many moons ago that if a sequel didn't offer any significant improvements visually to set it apart from the original, it may be a reason among others why a game won't get a Western release. Don't ask me where I read that. I can't remember. It may have been in a magazine. I'm showing how old I am here. Or a website. Or maybe I just made it up. Anyway, it's probably because I remember playing 5 and thinking, no wonder why they skipped this. It doesn't look significantly different from 4. But really, graphics had nothing to do with why 2, 3, or 5 weren't localized at all. After a quick Google search, I found that there were various complications as to why that was. So please do not summon Odin on me in the comment section. A lot of this is just me thinking out loud. Actually, you ever have these moments where you're thinking everything out in your head and you say something halfway through your thought and you think everyone heard your thoughts up until that point, but really they're just confused? That's what happened when I got to the end of this video with the localization bit. Anyway, I hope that makes sense now, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Now, let's roll the credits. You know, it took me hours to make a 15, 16-minute video. And throughout my travels on YouTube and on one of Super Rad's community posts, he shared a comment from one of his commenters or subscribers, I don't know, that pretty much summarized everything I was saying in just 2 sentences. Monster Hunter is a weird franchise. People applaud bringing back the same monster from the last 10 years, sometimes even with the same shitty model. You ain't alone, brother or sister. You ain't alone.